So in Chapter 4, you're starting off with all the units you have left over from Chapter 3. That's everyone unless somebody died. Once the chapter starts, you're also going to get 3 new units. Those are Celine, a strong early game mage. Louis, who's a strong, high defense, high strength tank and an armored unit. Most of the enemies in Maddening, at least in the early chapters, can't do any damage to him at all, so he'll be a powerful choke holder. And then you'll also get Chloe, who's a Pegasus Knight, highly mobile, super fast, so she's going to be doubling most of the enemies, doing a lot of damage. Probably one-rounding most of the squishies and non-armored units you'll come across. So a really powerful group of characters added to your team this chapter. So for this map, we're going to have a small group of enemies to the north, a small group of enemies to the east. We're going to be dealing with lancemen, axemen, Pegasus Knights, and the like. So my advice is to send your allier north, just because that's where she's already positioned. I'm going to ally mine with Vander just to help set up easy kills, and Etier just for the Pegasus Knights that are up there. I think there's one starting off, but then later in the map, another Pegasus Knight spawns from the fortress. And that's going to happen in both fortresses, so the one in the north and the one in the east. Later in the map, Pegasus Knights are going to spawn from both of those. So one of the trickier parts to this map is the fact that Louis and Chloe are going to be separated from the rest of your group, and it's going to take a few turns before you can catch up to them and provide any backup. The only saving grace to that is that you get Celine with the Celica emblem, and she can teleport using her special ability Warp Ragnarok, and she can teleport up here with these guys to give them a little bit of backup until then. If you want to, you can teleport with her right away, right in the beginning. Just teleport up here and blow up whoever you want. But in my case, I'm going to keep her down here for just one turn, I believe, to help me just quickly get through these enemies down here. Chloe and Louis are really strong units, and they can really last for quite a while up there. They've got vulneraries to heal themselves, and like I said, Louis is super strong, super tanky. The only thing you got to worry about is mages, and as you saw, Chloe can one-round mages. So not too worried about those guys up there, at least not just yet.
Yeah.
Your team is obviously already split up just because Louis and Chloe are on the other side of the map, but to add to that, you could split up your team like I'm doing, going north and east on both sides. But you don't have to do this. If you want to, you can just keep all of your units together and attack one side first, like maybe attack the east side first, because that's the one that has the village that you want to go to and activate and close their doors. And then just wait for the northern units to come down to you, and then you'll have like a little hallway type area because of the water and the building, creating minimal space for them to attack you, and then you can just have an easier time defending that if you want to. So if you're having trouble with this map, I would recommend keeping all your guys together and sending them down that route and just waiting out the enemies. If you're going to split up your forces like I do, that's going to be a little bit faster. I just recommend you send an archer, which in this case is just Etier, up top, up north with your main character, just to provide some assistance with the Pegasus Knights. Just make it a lot easier to clean them up, because you could just do so much damage to the Pegasus Knights. And Celine, if you send her to the east, there's an armored unit, so she's going to provide a lot of damage to him. But you also have Clan, so don't forget Clan is a mage as well, so he's going to do a lot of damage to knights as well. So as long as you provide like a good defense down there, you'll be good. One thing to keep in mind, Etier is super weak. I think she gets one-rounded by most of the enemies, so just if you're using her, make sure you do not leave her vulnerable to attack. Like every turn she should be safe, otherwise she's probably gonna die. So here you'll see the strength of Celine, at least in this chapter. I'm going to go ahead and engage her, and I'm going to use her ability, or Celica's ability, Echo, which is going to allow me to attack twice at 60% damage. So attacking twice at 60% damage is going to give you 120% total damage output for that turn. But you get to split it 2 ways. So in this case, I'm going to finish off one of these enemies and then finish off the other. So kill 2 enemies in 1 turn, rather than wasting a bunch of magic on this guy who's already got really low 7 HP to begin with. So you really don't want to attack him. Of course, I get a critical hit, which, you know, I end up wasting a lot of damage anyway, but it's all good. Just showing you the power of this character. And if you're wondering why I'm doing so much damage to this one, even with 60% damage, that's because Seraphim gets bonus damage, or it gets effective damage against corrupted units. So if you see all these units that have this little dragon emblem in the top right of their character model, that's because they're corrupted and they get hit for effective damage by Seraphim. So just keep that in mind. Now ideally you'd want to heal with your Fram here to get some sort of experience, or use a staff or get an attack in, anything you could do at all, but all of my units killed everything without taking much damage or any damage at all, so I'm not going to be able to get that. So just going to sit through enemy phase here. I get a lucky dodge. I don't think I'm going to take too much damage. You actually get the Draconic Time Crystal on this map. I skipped the cutscene and the explanation, but basically it's like a turn wheel. You get to rewind time by however much you want, basically, but, you know, each unit movement. So like if you move one character, you can rewind that move and go backwards through all your movements, through all your turns, all the way to the beginning. Except in this map, you don't get to go all the way to the beginning. You only get to go back to where you got the turn crystal. So that's just a little tricky thing to keep in mind. After this, though, on every other map, you'll be able to revert all the way to the beginning of the map if you want. So that's just a really useful mechanic for if you get like surprised by a lucky critical hit from the enemy, or if reinforcements show up in a spot where you weren't expecting, you can rewind time. Or you can rewind time just to improve your positioning, or, you know, anything like that. For me on this map, I had to use it a lot because I kept accidentally putting my Etier in range of the enemy, thinking that she might survive or that she wasn't as squishy as she was, and she kept dying. But I edited out most of those, I think all of those rewinds, so you won't see that in this video. So for the rest of this map, it's just going to be straightforward, clearing out enemies one at a time, advancing my units forward on both sides. So there's not really much to discuss. It's pretty easy. All you got to the only real decision making you got to do here is deciding which unit is going to get the experience, really. And this was my first playthrough of this map ever, so I made some decisions that you might not agree with. That's fine. One thing I did was I gave experience to a lot of units that don't have emblem rings, so it's not totally a waste because you're still leveling up those units. But on a second playthrough, you're going to want to get your units that have emblem rings a lot of the attacks, because you want them to gain SP so that they can inherit good skills. The skills aren't so important in early game, but you'll see later in the game it's going to be really useful to have the right skills. They're going to increase the effectiveness of your units by a lot. So you can see right here, this is just me teleporting and using Warp Ragnarok with Saline in order to kill that archer, so that that archer won't be able to go and kill Chloe, my Pegasus Knight. Pegasus Knights take a lot of damage from archers. Bows have effective damage against flying units of all types, so just keep that in mind. And especially on Maddening, you're probably going to get one shot if you put your Pegasus Knight or Wyvern Wing Rider in range of any bow users at all. And then even some mage units have wind magic, which is also effective against Pegasus Knights and other flyers, but you won't have to worry about that in this chapter or any of the next few chapters. That'll come into play a little bit later. So I'm not going to have too much to say here. I'm going to set this guy up for my Allier, and then I'm going to engage with Allier, which gives me access to the Rapier, so I probably didn't need the setup in the first place. But my advice for you, if you're at this point in the map, is just make sure you're abusing cover. Make sure you have as many units in bushes or on fortresses as you can. Bushes increase your avoid, so that's going to make it more likely for you to dodge enemies and take 0 damage. And fortresses boost your avoid and also heal you at the end of every turn, so they're really good spots to hold defensively. So yeah, keep that in mind. I'm just going to skip to the next turn now. So you can see the enemy has advanced. My units are getting some healing because of they're on the fortresses. Still not much of note. This map is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and the enemies are pretty sparsely packed. So it's not like you have a lot to deal with at once. You can really take your time with this map. I've seen people use this map to just do some cheesy grinding to get some of their characters like Fram to level 20. I'm not going to do anything like that here. This is my first playthrough, so I just don't want to do anything too cheesy just yet. Maybe on my second playthrough I'll do all that. That's why I don't have any DLC or anything like that. I just like to play the game the way it was balanced the first time through, and then on my second and third playthrough start having fun and messing around trying to break things. So for this part of the game, when you're fighting, you know, one enemy at a time like I'm doing right now, just take your time with it. Make sure you get experience on whoever you want to get experience on. Make sure you use as many attacks as possible to kill the enemies, just to be safe and get a little bit of experience on everybody. And keep in mind that your characters with emblem rings are going to be gaining SP, so it's a little bit more important for them to get the kills, but it's not the end of the world if you don't do that. Like, if you want Boucheron to get a bunch of experience, then be my guest. Blow up your Boucheron, make him as big as he possibly can before the next chapter. I really like Freddy in my playthrough so far. I think I'm currently at chapter 10 by the time this video releases. But at this point, this is chapter 4. At this point, I didn't really like Freddy that much. I wasn't planning on keeping him just because I'm usually not a fan of the cavalry units. They're usually like middling stats, and the best thing about them is that they have a lot of movement. So I wasn't focusing on getting him too much experience. I wanted to give most of my experience to Chloe, so you see I moved her down here. But where I'm at in the game now, I'm really liking Alfred. I know a lot of people don't like him for whatever reason. Like, there's a lot of tier list discussion online. A lot of people say he gets outclassed, he's not worth the investment, da 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 da. But I like him. He's tanky, he's strong, I like his character. To me, he's basically just like a horse version and slightly less tanky version of Louis. Probably if I changed him, reclassed him to a knight or a great knight like Louis, well, I guess Louis is not a great knight, but if I reclassed him to a great knight, he'd probably be just as tanky as Louis and serve the same purpose. Probably even better, because since he would have less defense, he'd be more likely to take more aggro. Whereas Louis doesn't take a lot of aggro for me at all where I am in the game, because he doesn't take any damage. So the enemies in Maddening just avoid him. So I don't expect too many of you to have a lot of problems with this map, but don't feel bad if you are. It takes a lot of people a long time to get good at this game, so just keep trying. I'm going to go into enemy phase here, and you're going to see I'm going to get a lucky dodge here. This guy has a 33% chance to hit, so he could have just killed my Saline, and I would have had to use the time crystal to go back and reposition her or something. So you don't always want to rely on a dodge like that. You might want to use a vulnerary or something like that to heal your units when they're in that position. But in my case, I got lucky, so we're not going to worry about it.
Was that sufficient?
So after this, we've killed enough units that the boss is just going to start advancing. They're not going to wait for us to come to them like in the old Fire Emblems. They're just going to move down here. So this is going to be another uneventful turn. My units are super spread out. The enemy is still just barely out of range. So I'm just going to skip to the enemy phase after I move everybody into position, and we'll go from there. So I've got all my guys moved. You can see I'm baiting out one of these knights with Vander, big boy Vander. He's going to do 18 damage, setting this guy up for an easy kill from Saline. And then a couple more Pegasus Knights are going to pop out of these fortresses. So these are the Pegasus Knights that I mentioned earlier. They're just now finally showing up. And be careful here. If you have your Etia in this position that I have her in, pretty sure she gets one-rounded by those Pegasus Knights. So you're going to have to use a time crystal if that happens to you. Just make sure, again, that she's not in range of any enemy attacks. You can press the right or the left trigger, and that'll show you like all the different ranges that enemies can move to, and just make sure she's not in any red squares.
All in the name of peace.
So here, if you're wondering why I'm sending Vander instead of Etier, is because Etier is not going to kill this thing in one hit. So if I send her to attack it and then send Vander, he's going to get the experience, which I don't want because I know I'm not going to use Vander going forward, or as soon as I run out of space to bring him, I'm not going to use him anymore. So I'm just going to use him to weaken this guy and send Etier. If you're wondering how I know that Etier is not going to kill this thing in one hit before sending her over there, is because I've already lost her before. I used the time crystal to rewind, so I already know that she's not killing this thing in one hit. Now at this point, if you don't have a steel weapon or some sort of strong heavy weapon, you're not going to be able to do damage to this guy without, well, with Allier, you're not going to be able to do damage to this guy without using your engage mode and using the rapier from Marth. I've already used my engage mode, so I can't do any damage to this guy, as you can see, because I don't have a steel sword or anything like that, or armor slayer or anything like that. And since this was my first time playing this map, I wasn't expecting these Pegasus flyers to come out of these fortresses. So you see my my team down here is a little out of position, with Clan being all the way in the back. So I just rearranged those guys to be in a more favorable position, while also moving my good characters, Chloe, Louis, and Freddy, ahead so that they can be ready for the boss fight.
What the heck? Oh.
You can see I'm desperately trying to figure out positioning for these guys down here. I sent Boucheron to defend Clan, but what I hadn't realized at this point was that Boucheron was going to get broken by this Pegasus Knight. I don't remember exactly what I was thinking here. I probably just thought that all Pegasus Knights would be using lances instead of swords and just got mixed up there. But yeah, I wasn't expecting him to get broken. I was expecting him to be able to counter this flyer with a little bit of damage. So that didn't happen, so now I got to figure out a way to get some damage on this guy without losing my two characters. And normally you'd be able to just run across the bridge here and defend pretty easily since it's only one tile wide. But since this is a flyer, he can attack us from the river, and that makes him pretty powerful. So the B squad looks like they're in a pretty scary situation because I might lose one guy, but I know that that Pegasus Knight is not going to one-round anybody, and he's probably going to go after Boucheron. So I'm going to leave my guys there, move the rest of my forces up here towards the boss again, And I'm just gonna skip this turn and we'll go to enemy phase and see what happens. So Boucheron takes more damage, gets broken, so he's not able to retaliate at all. And as you can see, we've got even more reinforcements pouring out of this fortress. So a lot has happened this turn. Still not enough enemies to really worry me. I've got a pretty large and powerful group of guys here. And the scariest thing they've got is the archer on the fortress. So he's going to get a lot of avoid, and he's going to be threatening my Pegasus rider. So that's something to be concerned with. You want to make sure that if you can, get your Pegasus rider out of the way of that archer, or take out that archer this turn. Now with that avoid plus 30, that might sound like a pretty daunting task, but you actually have a couple of options. Mages, I believe, get to ignore terrain provided evasion rates, so magic users should still have full accuracy on this archer. Also, engage attacks for the most part I think have 100% accuracy almost all the time. So in this case, you see I have my allier, I've got my engage, so I'm just going to engage and use low star rush to crush this guy, and Chloe is safe. I don't believe she dies to that lance user, but even if she did, you'll see I take care of him this turn as well.
Up my weights.
And with that taken care of, let's go check in on our B team, see how they're handling this lone Pegasus Knight. In my case, I'm just going to experiment with a couple of things here. For one, the backup mechanic, and for two, override with Sigurd. So you'll see I'm going to make some moves that are probably a little bit questionable, but that's because I was just testing things out in this run.
My muscles are yours. One strike will decide it all.
Now I will say I was at first a little bit underwhelmed with Override, which is Sigurd's ability. I was just expecting it to do a lot more damage, more like Marth's ability or Celine's ability, Warp Ragnarok. But at this point in the game, I hadn't realized that it was an AoE attack, so you can go through a line of enemies. I think you can hit like 3 or 4 at once and go through them, so it's a lot of damage. It's probably more damage than Marth's ability or Warp Ragnarok's ability would give you, so in the end, it's probably still worth it.
Let me help. I'll take this.
I will protect you.
So that Pegasus Knight is finally taken care of. I milked him for tons of experience. He's been around for a lot of turns, giving Fram a lot of heals and Boucheron a lot of defenses. Actually, I think his defenses didn't give him any experience because of the breaking. Since he didn't do any damage, he doesn't get any experience. But Fram gets experience, Clan got a lot of experience, and of course, Alfred got a lot of experience. And at this point, the boss is moving in on me finally, so we can finally worry about that. The boss has 2 mages backing him up. I believe Chloe 1 rounds each of them, so I'm not too worried. I think at worst I'd have to take out 2 units, that one being the boss and one being the second mage, whichever one that Chloe doesn't get around to. So this is pretty much a wrap at this point. Later on, the bosses will have much bigger entourages, and they'll have 2 health bars, you'll see. So that'll be a lot more difficult to deal with. But for now, this boss is pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna bait him back into this choke point right here, and that'll give me a lot more options and a lot more vectors for attack with my 2 range units, Chloe and Etier. Celine and Etier. In this game, they're pretty good about peppering in mage units just enough to keep you from abusing knights like Louis. So this would be a great choke point for Louis to hold. I could probably really abuse this boss if I was able to do that, but since they're mages, can't use him. He'll probably get 1 rounded.
I can keep going.
Just gonna make sure to move these guys up and get some healing with Fram.
Sorry to trouble you.
I'll do my best.
I'm just gonna cycle through my units and hover them next to the enemies and see how much damage they do. So I already checked with Celine how much damage she did, just checked with Alier how much damage he's gonna do, checking with Vander how much damage he is gonna do, and then I'll be able to make an informed decision on how I want to proceed with this turn.
Soon I'll be a legend.
So I'm just gonna start this fight off with Celine on the fortress, and that's just so that I can get some damage off on this guy and also move Celine out of the way so that another unit can get through. So the boss is down to 5 HP, so all I gotta worry about is who I want to finish him off with and whether or not they can do any damage to him. So now that Celine's out of the way here, I can move Etier in and get a kill on this guy.
That was a good session.
And to maximize my experience, I just want to get that last mage at the back. So you're going to see me waffle around for a bit here because I'm not able to find a way to kill that mage this turn. So basically I'm just going to pass and go to the next turn. The enemy is going to move forward with their mage and attack Etier. It's not going to kill her though, so she's just going to get a nice little retaliation off. So that guy's one shot. The boss is actually going to try to attack Chloe. She's on the fortress though, so you see she's got a lot of avoid, and he misses. And she kills him. So I ended up not being able to kill the mage, but I tried. I recommend that if you're playing this, you try to kill the mage yourself, kill all the enemies, get as much experience as possible. That'll just set you up for the best time through Maddening mode.